All right, this is installing the crank and the main bearing caps back into a 5.4 Ford V8. This motor is out of a 99 Lightning. I've already got the bearings. Obviously, I'm mostly done. I just got the cap for number one to go. So you can see the main bearing for number one right here between the crank and the block. So what you want to do is when you set the, I'll show you on a bearing cap. So you set them the same. The number one bearing cap, the tang is actually off center versus the other ones are centered. So the number one actually has unique bearings. So just push it back in there. And so whether you're putting them into the cap or into the block, feel it right here. If you can feel a little ledge of the bearing and not here, you need to push the bearing down until you have the same amount of step. I mean, that's what I've read. There's no specific amount, but so that's what you do on the block. So for all the main bearings, you set the bearings in there first, lube them up. The backs should be completely dry. The block should be completely dry. And then, you know, carefully set your crank in, rotate it to make sure it's going well. At your number 5, you have thrust bearings. And so see how these two are identical? So one goes on the front of the number 5 main bearing, and the other one goes on the back. And the one that's different, I'll show you. It goes next to the main bearing cap right here. That's that tang right there. And if you look at the backs of them are smooth, and the fronts have little grooves. That's so that way oil can get in there. See that right there by the groove? So that way oil can get in between there. So that keeps the crank front to back play. They're just aluminum. They just slide into place. Mind you, if you go to turn the crank with these in before you put the number 5 main bearing cap on, they will roll up and around. So make sure they're pressed all the way down. But see how they're like, they're in there lightly. I don't know if you can hear that. But so as you're turning the crank to make sure there's no binding, if you hear something and it makes you go, crap, what's that? Well, it's just your thrust bearing. These are obviously the old ones. So it's the same process for all the other bearing caps. So I'm gonna do number 1 because it's easier to see. So take your studs, a little bit of engine oil or Moly lube, whichever you prefer. I didn't have any Moly lube, and well, I need to get this motor together. So I've already marked and laid out all the hardware from when I disassembled the motor. I disassembled because it had a piston loose compression. Tiny little piece there. I sanded it smooth so that way when I set the ring gap, it wasn't going to catch on anything, and I ended up using a bolt to set it anyways. But so that's what happened. Ring broke, I presume, and that's how it lost the compressions. So then these, you just turn them in finger tight and then back them off about a half a turn. You do not torque them into place. If you're using the factory bolts, then follow that procedure. But for this, using ARP hardware, sorry, I'm watching what I'm doing, not the camera so much. So then just put them in with, you know, these are ARP hardware, so that way they want, like I said, the motor oil or Moly lube. And then make sure I've already lubed up with the bearings assembly lube. You can use engine oil, but this is better. It sticks on there longer. So now that I've got the bearing set within the cap, like I said, the same procedure I would for the block side. So these are actually the lower bearings because, you know, the motor's upside down. So some of the bearings will say upper and lower. These ones due to, you know, the oil wave, whatever the real name is, I don't know. The bearing actually has a groove on the bottom. Let me see if, hold on one moment. Yeah, I'm still here, hold on. Didn't think this through very well. This is actually the number 2 This is number 2 bearing. I'm showing you that because see how the tang is centered versus number 1 is off-centered, and that's on the upper and lower bearing. So it's got the oil way and a channel, so that way oil can get up to the crank, and then from there it gets pushed through the crank up to the connecting rod. So here these are. It's got an arrow. The caps are numbered from the factory. So it's number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. They also have an arrow pointing which way is the front of the motor. Like, yeah, number 3, that was probably done on a Friday. Guy wanted to hurry up and get home, so it's not really accurate. But it's how you can tell is the tang for the bearing goes both bearings, the tang, so in the block. So the bearing's sitting there in the block, and then the cap, the tangs will match up. You won't have one on each side. So then when you get this in, this is the easiest one to see. So just take and tap it down till these are even. And then while I'm doing this, I'll rotate the crank a little bit to make sure it's nice, it's still going nice and smooth. There. Now that it's all the way down. There may be more different procedures, better to do this. I couldn't find any videos. I've read some write-ups specifically for the 5.4. So I didn't know exactly what to do, and it's been a couple of weeks of reading, watching, and whatnot. And then when you have your side bolts, so and then you torque these down to, the main caps are 27 to 32 foot-pounds, and then after that, then you turn them another 85 to 95 degrees. And then the procedure I found says hammer in the dowel pins. So that's these. It's a 12 millimeter, so that way you can turn them so you can see the orientation to be able to get the dowel back in. So you hammer those in, and then you put the side bolt in, or else called the cross bolt, and these get torqued to 20 to 24 foot-pounds, and then another 85 to 95 degrees. And then after that, it should be good to go. These I'm just, finger tight, and then I'm gonna set up the torque wrench and go through and torque them. If you have any input, or if there are videos on assembling the bottom end of a 5.4, preferably 2-valve, but I don't think the bottom end matters on any of these, post a link or tell me how to find it, because I couldn't find it. This is only like my second YouTube video, so bear with me. And pray for me that this motor works when it's up, when I'm finished, because this is the first motor I've ever assembled, other than, one or two cylinder small engines. So I appreciate any feedback, or tell me how messed up I am. I know I'm in a dirty garage. It's not a hospital room, as every other videos of other, 350 Chevys and stuff like that I watched, of how to, set the ring gaps and things like that. That, some of that stuff is essentially the same. And, like I said, pray for me, give me your good vibes that this motor will hold up and hold up to the boost that I'm gonna run it again when I'm done. Got the ported heads over there, got the old heads over there, got the blower and stuff over there. So thanks and enjoy.